Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we drift together into an unanswered sky slowly, calmly, and without fear. Here, we don't rush toward conclusions. We listen, we observe, and we let the mystery breathe. If these stories bring you a sense of calm or keep you company through the night, you're always welcome to stay with us. Subscribing gently helps this space grow, and it allows more quiet minds to find their way here. You can also leave us soft, like if the story helps you relax, unwind, or feel less alone beneath the night sky. And if any thoughts rise as you listen, you're welcome to share them in the comments below. You wake up at 3:33 a.m. Your body is frozen, but your mind is fully awake. Something is standing in your room, watching you. People around the world describe the exact same presence. But is it something real, or something your mind creates in sleep? And why does it always feel more real than a dream? Chapter 1. The night that didn't let go. There is a kind of night that refuses to end when you wake up. It doesn't disappear with the darkness or fade with the first hint of morning. It lingers quietly, almost patiently, settling somewhere deep in your thoughts, as if it has decided to stay a little longer than it should. That night begins like any other. The room is familiar in every possible way. The same ceiling you've looked at countless times. The same soft shapes resting in the corners. The same door, slightly open, creating a thin line of darkness that stretches across the floor like a quiet boundary between one space and another. Nothing has changed, and yet something about it all feels just slightly different, though not enough to immediately notice. You lie down, letting your body sink into the mattress. The day slowly slips away from your mind, one thought at a time. Your breathing steadies, your muscles loosen, and the gentle pull of sleep begins to take over. There is comfort in this routine, in the quiet repetition of something so ordinary. And then, without warning, you wake up. Not slowly, not gradually, but instantly, as if something inside you decided it was time to return. Your eyes open to the same room. Nothing appears out of place. The shadows sit where they always do. The silence is still there, calm and undisturbed. But there is a feeling now, subtle yet undeniable, that something is not quite right. At first, it is easy to ignore. A small tension in your chest, a slight heaviness in the air. You take a breath, and it feels thicker than usual, as if the space around you has quietly changed without asking permission. You try to shift under the blanket, just a small movement to adjust your position. Nothing happens. You pause, not alarmed yet, just confused. Maybe you didn't try properly. You focus again, this time more deliberately, trying to move your hand. Still nothing. Now your attention sharpens. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. A quiet understanding begins to form as you attempt again, sending signals to your fingers, your arms, your legs. None of them respond, and in that moment, a realization settles in, calm but heavy. You are awake, but your body is not. The silence in the room changes. It no longer feels empty. It feels filled with something you cannot quite define. Your ears begin to pick up details you would normally ignore. A distant sound outside, faint and far away, the almost imperceptible hum of electricity somewhere in the walls. The rhythm of your own breathing, steady but louder now in your awareness. Everything feels clearer than it should. You try to speak, even just a whisper, but your throat tightens without sound. The effort exists, but the result does not. And then something shifts. Not in the room, not in the objects around you, but inside you. A feeling begins to take shape. Not a thought, not something you decide, but something that arrives on its own. You are not alone. It does not come with panic. It comes with certainty. A quiet, undeniable knowing that settles into your chest and refuses to move, like walking into a space and sensing someone else's presence before you ever see them. Your eyes remain facing forward, but your attention slowly turns, carefully, almost cautiously, toward the darker side of the room. At first, there is nothing, only the usual shadows, layered softly across the walls and floor. But the longer you look, the more those shadows begin to feel structured, as if one of them is not like the others. It doesn't move. It doesn't step forward. It doesn't reveal itself suddenly. It simply becomes clearer. A shape begins to form, separating itself from the darkness with quiet patience. Your eyes struggle to fully understand it, trying to place it into something familiar, something safe. But nothing fits. It stands there, still and silent. You can't say exactly when you began to see it, only that now it is there, and you cannot ignore it. Your heartbeat grows louder, not racing wildly, but steady and strong, echoing in your ears. Each beat feels closer, more present, as if your body is trying to respond in the only way it can. You search for explanation. A shadow, a trick of light, something ordinary that your mind can hold on to. But the shape holds its form. It has structure, intention, a presence that feels deliberate rather than accidental. And then, slowly, details begin to emerge. A head, smooth in a way that doesn't seem natural. Eyes, dark, wide, and still. They do not blink. They do not shift. They simply remain, fixed in a way that feels less like looking and more like observing. The distance between you and it feels strange, close enough to matter, yet somehow distant in a way that is hard to measure. Time itself begins to feel different. It stretches quietly, each second lingering longer than expected, as if the moment does not want to move forward. Your thoughts continue, but more quietly now, less frantic, more focused. A single question begins to form, not loudly, but clearly. Is this real? It doesn't feel like a dream. There is no softness, no blur around the edges. Everything holds its place with sharp clarity. The room remains consistent, unchanged. The bed beneath you is real. The air you breathe is real, which makes one thing harder to ignore. The presence feels real too. You try once more to move, gathering whatever effort you can into a single action. Your fingers, just your fingers. Nothing. The shape does not react. It does not move closer. It does not disappear. It simply remains, watching. Then something else begins to happen. A sensation starts deep within your chest. Subtle at first, almost easy to miss. A vibration. Not something you hear, but something you feel. It spreads slowly, moving outward through your body, reaching your arms, your legs, settling into every part of you. It is not painful, just unfamiliar. And that unfamiliarity makes it feel important. Your breathing changes slightly, becoming more controlled, more aware. And for a brief moment, the fear softens just enough for something else to take its place. Curiosity. Because now, instead of only reacting, you begin to observe. What is this? Why is this happening? The questions don't demand answers. They simply exist, floating quietly in the space between you and whatever stands in the room. And then, just as quietly as it began, everything shifts again. The weight disappears. Your fingers move. Your chest rises freely. You sit up suddenly, breath filling your lungs in a way that feels almost new. The room is empty. Completely. Nothing stands where the shape once was. The shadows return to their normal places. The silence becomes ordinary again. And yet, something remains. The memory does not fade. It stays clear, detailed, as if it has been carefully placed in your mind rather than created in a dream. You look around again, slower this time, more carefully. Everything is exactly as it should be, but it does not feel the same. You lie back down, but sleep does not come yet. Your mind returns to the moment again and again, replaying it without losing clarity. The shape, the stillness, the eyes, and one thought continues to return, quiet but persistent. If it wasn't real, why does it feel like it was? Time passes, though it feels different now. Slower, more noticeable. Eventually, your eyes shift toward the clock. 3:33 a.m. The number stands out, for no clear reason. Yet it settles into your memory as if it matters. Some moments do not pass completely. They leave something behind, and from that night on, sleep changes. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that makes you afraid to close your eyes, but in a quieter way. A subtle awareness that something more exists within it, something just beneath the surface. And sometimes, when the room grows too still, when the silence stretches just a little too far, a question returns without being invited. Was that just a moment? Or the beginning of something you have not yet understood? Because once a question like that enters your mind, it does not leave easily. It stays, softly, waiting. And somewhere beneath that thought, another begins to form, quieter still. Not about what you saw, but about what your mind might be capable of showing you. And without realizing it, the journey has already begun. Chapter 2. The Presence That Knew the Way Back. The next night arrives without announcing anything unusual. The evening passes in its ordinary rhythm, filled with small routines that usually go unnoticed. There is comfort in repetition, in the quiet predictability of things happening the way they always do. You move through your day as you normally would, and whenever the memory of the previous night tries to surface, you gently push it aside. It was just a moment, you tell yourself. A strange experience. Maybe, but nothing more than that. The mind can do unusual things, especially in the middle of the night. In the daylight, everything feels easier to explain. Thoughts settle into logic. Fear dissolves into reason. But as the hours pass and night begins to return, something shifts. It's not obvious at first, just a subtle awareness that wasn't there before. You notice the room differently, the way the shadows fall, the way silence gathers in the corners, the way the door remains slightly open, creating that same thin line across the floor. Nothing has changed, and yet you are more aware of everything. When you lie down, your body relaxes, as it always does. Your breathing slows, your muscles soften, and sleep begins to approach in its quiet, familiar way. But this time there is something else present within you. A thought that doesn't fully fade, a quiet expectation. You don't know exactly when sleep takes you, only that it does, gently and without resistance. And then, just as suddenly as before, you wake. The moment feels almost familiar now. Your eyes open, and for a brief second, everything appears normal. The same room, the same stillness, the same darkness resting softly in place. But that brief second passes quickly, because the feeling returns. That same subtle heaviness settles into your chest. The air around you feels slightly thicker, as if the space itself has quietly shifted. This time, you don't need to test it. You don't need to try moving your hand or your legs. You already know. Your body is still awake, but unable to respond. There is no confusion this time. No moment of questioning. Only recognition. Your mind adjusts more quickly, as if it has already learned the shape of this experience. Your breathing changes slightly, becoming more deliberate, not out of fear, but out of awareness. You are noticing everything now. The silence in the room feels deeper, more defined. It is no longer just the absence of sound. It feels like something that exists on its own, filling the space in a way that is difficult to describe. You listen, not for noise, but for something else, something beneath the quiet. And then it comes again, that same unmistakable knowing. You are not alone. This time, the realization settles in more smoothly. It doesn't surprise you in the same way it did before. Instead, it feels like something returning, something that has found its way back. Your eyes shift slowly toward the darker part of the room, almost automatically now. There is no rush in the movement, no panic behind it. Who's to steady, careful attention? For a moment, there is nothing. Only the familiar darkness, unchanged and still. But you don't relax, because part of you already understands what will happen next. And then, gradually, it begins again. A shape forms within the darkness. Not suddenly, not sharply, but slowly, as if it has always been there, waiting for you to notice it once more. The outline becomes clearer, separating itself from the surrounding shadows with quiet patience. It stands in the same place, the same position, unmoving. As the seconds pass, the details begin to settle into focus. A head, smooth and unfamiliar in its stillness. Eyes, large and dark, holding their position without blinking or shifting. There is no doubt now. It is the same, not similar, not something your mind is comparing or recreating. The same presence, a strange calm, begins to settle within you. Your heartbeat remains steady, not racing or overwhelming. There is still a sense of unease, but it is softer now, less intense than before. In its place, something else grows. Curiosity. You find yourself observing more closely, not just reacting to what is happening, but paying attention to it, noticing the small details you missed before, the exact distance between you and the figure, the way the darkness around it seems slightly deeper, as if it carries its own shadow. It does not move, it does not approach. It simply remains, as it did before. And yet, its stillness feels deliberate, intentional, as if it is aware of you in the same way you are aware of it. That thought stays with you for a moment, not as fear, but as something more complex, something you cannot fully explain. A quiet question begins to form. Is this happening to you, or with you? The idea feels unfamiliar, but it does not disappear. Instead, it lingers, growing slowly as the moment continues. Because now, this no longer feels random. It feels structured, repeated, like something following a pattern you are only just beginning to recognize. Your breathing steadies further, becoming calm in a way that surprises you. You focus again on the presence, trying to understand something about it, anything that might give it meaning. But it offers nothing. No movement, no change, only that same silent observation. And then, just as before, everything shifts. The weight on your chest disappears. Your body responds again, as if a switch has been quietly turned back on. Your fingers move, your arms follow, and your chest rises freely with each breath. You sit up, slower this time, more aware of your surroundings. The room is empty, exactly as it was. You don't rush to look around. You already know what you will find. Nothing. And yet, something has changed. Not the room, not the space around you. But you sit there for a moment, breathing evenly, letting the experience settle into your mind. It doesn't feel like a dream. It doesn't carry the softness or confusion that dreams usually leave behind. It feels like something that has happened twice, and that makes it different. That makes it harder to ignore. You glance at the clock. 3:33 a.m. the same time. That detail stays with you longer than anything else. It anchors the experience in a way that feels undeniable. Once might have been coincidence. Twice feels like something else. You lie back down, staring at the ceiling, aware of the quiet in a way you were not before. Sleep feels distant now, not because you are afraid, but because your mind is active, turning over the moment again and again. The same shape, the same stillness, the same silence. And one realization settles in clearly. This is not random. You don't know what it is. You don't know why it is happening, but you know it has happened again. And somewhere, quietly beneath the uncertainty, something begins to take shape. Not fear, not panic, but understanding. Not complete, not fully formed, but enough to shift something inside you. Because now, when you close your eyes, you are no longer simply drifting into sleep. You are entering a space where something has already happened, and might happen again. That thought does not feel loud or overwhelming. It simply stays with you, softly, like the memory of something unfinished. And as the night continues, stretching slowly toward morning, one quiet awareness remains. This was not just a moment. It was the beginning of a pattern. Chapter 3. Patterns in the Dark. By the third night, something has already changed, even if you don't say it out loud. The world looks the same streets, the same routine, the same familiar rhythm of daily life. Nothing around you has shifted in any visible way. And yet, something inside you has adjusted, quietly, almost without permission. You begin to notice things you never paid attention to before. Not big things, not dramatic changes. Small details. The way shadows stretch a little longer in the evening. The way certain corners of a room feel deeper than others. The way silence sometimes carries a kind of weight, as if it holds more than just the absence of sound. It doesn't disturb you. Not exactly. But it stays with you. Throughout the day, your mind returns to the previous nights without fully meaning to. Not in a panicked way, not in a way that interrupts what you're doing, but in a slow, thoughtful way. You remember the stillness, the presence, the way everything felt so real. And more than anything, you remember the repetition, the same moment, happening twice. That part is harder to ignore, because when something repeats, it stops feeling accidental. It begins to feel like something else. Something with structure, something with intention. You don't fully understand that thought yet, and you don't try to force it into meaning. You simply let it sit there, quietly, somewhere in the background of your awareness. As the day fades into evening again, you find yourself paying more attention than usual. Not out of fear, but out of anticipation. You notice the room before you lie down, the exact position of objects, the way the door remains slightly open, the angle of the shadows, the faint differences in light that shift as the night deepens. It feels almost like preparing for something, even though you don't know what you're preparing for. When you finally lie down, your body relaxes the same way it always does, but your mind remains just slightly more alert. Not restless, not tense, just aware. Sleep comes, as it always does, quietly and naturally. And then, once again, you wake. This time, there is no confusion at all. The moment you open your eyes, you recognize the feeling, the stillness, the heaviness, the complete lack of movement in your body. There is no need to test it. You already understand. Your body is not responding, but your mind is fully awake. And with that awareness comes something new. You are expecting what comes next. The room feels deeper, more layered, as if the darkness has more depth than it should. Your breathing remains steady, controlled, not because you force it, but because you have already been here before. And then, slowly, that familiar sensation returns, the presence. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It doesn't shock you. It simply appears in your awareness, like something stepping into a space that was always meant for it. You turn your attention toward the same place. The darker side of the room, the place where the shape appeared before. And just like the previous nights, it begins to form, gradually, quietly, without movement. A shape separates itself from the shadows, becoming clearer with each passing second. The outline is unmistakable now. There is no need to question it, no need to guess. It is the same, exactly the same. The head, smooth and still, the eyes, dark and wide, fixed in a way that feels less like looking and more like observing. It stands in the same place, at the same distance, holding the same position it did before. There is something almost precise about it. Something measured. And for the first time, that detail stands out to you. Not just that it is there, but that it is consistent. Your mind begins to connect the moments, slowly, carefully. The same experience. The same time. The same presence. This is not just repetition. This is a pattern. The thought settles in gently, without urgency, but it carries weight. It changes how you experience the moment. You are no longer simply reacting. You are observing, watching, trying to understand. Your heartbeat remains steady. The fear that once filled this space has softened, replaced by something quieter, something more focused. Curiosity. You begin to notice things you didn't before. The way the presence does not shift at all, as if movement is not part of its purpose. The way the darkness around it feels slightly deeper, almost as if it belongs more to that space than the rest of the room. The way time itself feels stretched, each second holding just a little longer than it should. And then something else becomes clear. The experience is not random in its timing. You don't need to check the clock. You already know. It is the same moment in the night, that same deep stillness, where everything outside feels distant and quiet, where the world itself seems paused, and somehow you are awake within it. The vibration returns, just as it did before. It begins in your chest, subtle but unmistakable, and spreads outward through your body. This time, it feels almost familiar, no longer surprising, but still impossible to fully understand. You don't resist it. You don't try to fight it. You simply let it exist. Because now, you are more interested in what is happening than in stopping it. The presence remains unchanged. Still, silent, watching. And again, that question returns. But this time, it feels clearer. This is not just something happening to you. It feels like something you are a part of. The idea is difficult to explain, even to yourself, but it does not leave. It grows slowly, shaping the way you see the moment. Because now, the experience feels less like an interruption and more like something structured, something that follows its own quiet logic. And then, just as before, it ends. The weight lifts. Your body responds, your fingers move, your chest rises, and you sit up, steady and aware. The room is empty, exactly as it always is when the moment passes. But this time, you don't question it in the same way. Because now, you have seen the pattern. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. Again, the same time, the same moment, the same experience. That detail settles into your mind with clarity. This is not random. It is not accidental. There is a structure to it, even if you don't yet understand what that structure means. You lie back down slowly, your eyes remaining open for a while longer. The room feels the same, but your perception of it has changed. Every shadow now feels more defined. Every corner holds more depth. The silence is no longer empty. It feels like something that can be entered. Your thoughts move quietly, without panic, without urgency. You begin to reflect, not just on what happened, but on what it might mean. Why the same presence? Why the same time? Why the same sequence? The questions don't demand answers. They simply exist, and that is enough. Because now, something deeper has begun. Not fear, not confusion, but awareness. A recognition that there is something happening beneath the surface of what you understand. Something consistent, something structured, something that feels almost intentional. You don't try to solve it. You don't rush to explain it. You simply accept that it is there. And as the night slowly continues, stretching toward morning, one quiet realization settles into place. This is no longer just an experience. It is a pattern you are beginning to see. And once you begin to see a pattern, it becomes very difficult to unsee it. Chapter 4. The Hidden Mechanism. By the fourth night, something subtle but important has changed. The experience is no longer something you are simply going through. It has begun to turn into something you are trying to understand, not in a rushed or analytical way, but in a quiet, patient way. Like someone slowly adjusting their eyes in the dark, allowing shapes to reveal themselves over time. During the day, your thoughts return to the night more often now. Not in a way that interrupts your routine, but in those small pauses between moments, when you're sitting still for a second longer than usual, or when your mind drifts just slightly from what you're doing. You find yourself replaying the sequence again and again. The stillness, the inability to move, the presence, the figure. The same time, the same feeling, the same outcome. And slowly, the question begins to change. At first, it was about reality. Was it real or not? But now, that question feels too simple, too limited, because whatever it is, it feels real enough to matter. So the question shifts into something deeper, something more precise. How is this happening? That question doesn't come with urgency. It settles in gently, like something that plans to stay for a while. And as it does, pieces of understanding begin to gather around it. You start remembering things you've heard before. Ideas that once felt distant now feel strangely connected. The way the brain works during sleep. The way dreams can feel vivid, detailed, almost indistinguishable from reality. The idea that the body sometimes becomes still while the mind remains active. Words begin to return to you, not clearly at first, but gradually taking shape. Sleep paralysis. You don't remember exactly where you heard it or when, but the concept feels familiar. And the more you think about it, the more it begins to align with what you've experienced. A state where the body cannot move, even though the mind is awake. A state where the boundary between dreaming and waking becomes unclear. That idea doesn't remove the mystery. It doesn't make the experience feel less intense, but it gives it a kind of structure, a framework that feels grounded, even if incomplete. That thought stays with you as the evening slowly returns. When you enter your room, everything looks the same as before, but your perception of it has shifted again. It no longer feels like just a place where something happened. It feels like a space where something unfolds, something that follows a quiet, repeating pattern. You sit for a moment before lying down, letting the silence settle around you. The room feels calm, unchanged, and yet your awareness of it is sharper. Every small detail seems slightly more defined, as if your mind is paying closer attention without needing to try. When you lie down, your body relaxes, as it always does. Your breathing slows, your muscles soften, and sleep begins to take hold. There is no resistance, no hesitation. And then, once again, you cross that invisible line. You wake. The moment is immediate now, almost expected. Your eyes open, and there is no confusion about what is happening. Your body is still, completely unresponsive. Your mind, however, is clear and alert. But this time, something is different. You are not just experiencing it. You are observing it. Carefully. Deliberately. You notice the exact rhythm of your breathing, the way your chest rises and falls. You become aware of the weight of your body against the mattress, the complete stillness in your limbs. You attempt to move, not out of fear, but as a quiet test. Nothing responds. But instead of reacting, you take note of it. You feel the stillness as something to observe, not something to fight. And then, as it has before, the presence returns. Not suddenly, not sharply, but in that same quiet way, a shift in awareness, a certainty that settles in without asking permission. You are not alone. Your eyes move toward the same part of the room, almost naturally now. There is no hesitation in the movement, no rush, just attention. The darkness holds for a moment, unchanged, and then the shape begins to form, slowly, patiently, separating itself from the surrounding shadows. The outline becomes clear, and there is no doubt anymore. It is the same figure, the same stillness, the same silent observation. But this time, your focus shifts. Not toward what it is, but toward how it appears. You begin to notice the sequence more clearly. First, the awareness, then the presence, then the formation of the shape. Each step following the next in a consistent order. It is not random. It is a process. That realization settles into your thoughts with quiet clarity. Because processes have explanations, even if they are not immediately obvious, your mind begins to explore the possibility more deeply. During sleep, the brain remains active. It creates images, builds scenarios, forms entire experiences without effort. At the same time, the body enters a state where movement is restricted, not by accident, but as a kind of built-in safety system, so that dreams stay in the mind instead of becoming physical actions. But sometimes, those two states overlap. The mind wakes up. The body does not. And in that overlap, something unusual happens. You are aware, but still within the environment of a dream. That idea begins to reshape how the moment feels, because now, the presence in the room becomes something different. Not something entering from outside, but something forming within your perception. You focus on the figure again, standing exactly as it has before. Still, silent, unmoving. And for the first time, you consider a possibility that feels both simple and complex at the same time. What if this is not something you are seeing in the room, but something your mind is creating within it? The thought doesn't reduce the experience. It doesn't make it feel less real. If anything, it makes it more fascinating, because it means your mind is capable of creating something so detailed, so consistent, that it can repeat itself across multiple nights without losing clarity. You begin to notice how stable the figure appears. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't distort. It holds its form in a way that feels almost solid. That detail stands out, because dreams are often fluid, shifting, unstable. But this is not. It remains exactly the same. And that leads to another question. If your mind is creating this, why this form? Why this specific shape? Why something that looks the way it does? The answer doesn't come all at once. It forms slowly, piece by piece, because somewhere in your memory, you have seen something like this before. Not in this room, not in this moment, but somewhere else. In images, in stories, in in things you may not have paid attention to at the time. The shape is not random, it is familiar, and your mind has chosen it. That realization settles quietly into place, bringing with it a deeper understanding. Your mind is not just reacting to something unknown. It is interpreting it, taking something abstract, something difficult to define, and turning it into a form that feels recognizable. The figure remains unchanged, but your perception of it shifts. You are no longer just seeing it. You are beginning to understand how it might be appearing. And then, as before, the moment begins to release. The weight lifts. Your body responds. Movement returns gradually, naturally. You sit up, your breathing steady, your thoughts clear. The room is empty. Exactly as it has been every time, but something has changed again. Not the experience, but your understanding of it. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. the same time, the same pattern. But now, you see it differently. Not just as something happening to you, but as something your mind is involved in shaping. You lie back down, your thoughts quieter now. Not searching with urgency, not trying to force answers, just observing. Because now, the mystery feels deeper, not smaller. More layered, more complex. And somewhere within that depth, a quiet realization begins to settle. This may not be coming from outside your room, but that does not make it any less real, because it is happening in the one place you cannot step away from, your own mind. And as that thought rests gently within you, the night continues in its quiet way, unchanged on the surface. But now, beneath that stillness, something has begun. Not just an experience, but an understanding that is slowly starting to take shape. Chapter 5. The Mind's Storytelling Power. By now, the nights no longer feel separate from the days. They're connected. What happens in the darkness doesn't fade when morning comes. It lingers quietly, threading itself through your thoughts in ways that feel subtle but constant. You find yourself noticing how often your mind returns to the same question, turning it gently from different angles, not trying to solve it all at once, but slowly, patiently, as if understanding will arrive on its own when it is ready. The experience has become familiar, but not ordinary. There is a difference between the two. Familiar means you recognize it. Ordinary means it no longer affects you, and this still does, just not in the same way it did before. The fear that once defined the moment has softened. It has not disappeared completely, but it has changed shape. It no longer rushes in all at once. Instead, it sits quietly in the background, leaving space for something else to grow in its place. Curiosity. You begin to think less about what is happening, and more about how your mind is involved in it. Not in a skeptical way, not in a dismissive way, but in a careful, open way. As if you are observing something delicate that should not be disturbed too quickly. And slowly, a new idea begins to form, not as a conclusion, but as a possibility. What if your mind is not just reacting to the experience? What if it is building it? That thought doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in gently, almost naturally, as if it has been waiting just beneath the surface of your awareness. You think back to the figure, the shape, the details that remain so consistent. The smooth head, the large, dark eyes, the stillness, the silence. It doesn't feel random. It feels specific. And specificity suggests choice. Even if that choice is not conscious, you begin to ask yourself where that image might come from. Not from the room, not from the moment itself, but from somewhere else. Somewhere inside you. You start to remember small things, images you have seen before, perhaps without giving them much thought at the time. Scenes from movies, pictures from articles, glimpses of something that once felt distant or fictional, but now feels strangely familiar. The idea becomes clearer. Your mind does not create from nothing. It creates from memory, from fragments, from pieces of information stored quietly over time. Even the things you don't pay attention to fully still remain somewhere within you. And when your mind needs to make sense of something unknown, it reaches for those pieces. It assembles them. It builds something recognizable. A form, a figure, a presence. That realization changes the way you remember the experience. Because now, The figure is no longer just something that appeared. It is something that may have been shaped, constructed, not deliberately, not consciously, but naturally, as part of the way the mind works. You sit with that thought for a while, letting it settle into place. It doesn't remove the mystery, but it gives it depth. It adds another layer to something that already feels complex. And with that layer comes another idea. If the mind is shaping the image, then what is it responding to? Because even if the form is constructed, the experience itself still begins somewhere. There is still the feeling, the presence, the awareness of something being there. That part comes first. Before the shape, before the image, before the figure becomes visible. And that makes you pause, because it suggests that the image is not the source. It is the result. Your mind feels something it cannot immediately explain, and then it builds something to explain it. That process feels quiet, almost automatic, like a story forming without effort. A story that begins with sensation and ends with meaning. You begin to notice how natural that process is, even outside of these experiences. When something unexpected happens, your mind looks for explanation. When something feels unclear, your mind fills in the gaps. It doesn't like uncertainty. It prefers structure. It prefers narrative. So, it creates one. That thought stays with you as the evening returns once again. The room feels familiar now in a deeper way, not just physically, but mentally. You recognize the space not only as it is, but as it becomes during the night. The shadows, the silence, the stillness, all of it feels like part of something larger. When you lie down, your body relaxes as usual, but your mind remains gently alert. Not tense, not waiting in fear, just aware. Sleep comes slowly, naturally, without resistance, and once again, you cross into that space between waking and dreaming. You wake. The moment feels almost expected now. Your eyes open and you recognize the state immediately. Your body is still. Your mind is clear. But this time, your focus is different. You are not waiting for what will happen. You are watching how it happens. You notice the stillness in your body, the quiet rhythm of your breathing, the way your awareness sharpens in the absence of movement. And then, the feeling arrives, that familiar sense, the presence. But instead of reacting, you observe it. Carefully. You pay attention to the exact moment it begins, the way it settles into your awareness, the way it shifts your perception of the room. And then, just as before, the shape begins to form. Slowly, gradually, emerging from the darkness as if it belongs there. But this time you notice something you didn't fully see before. It doesn't appear all at once. It builds piece by piece. The outline first, then the details. The head, the eyes, the form. Your mind is assembling it. You can almost feel the process happening, not in a visible way, not in something you can control, but in something you can sense. The image is being created, and yet it feels completely real. That contradiction holds your attention, because it shows you something important. Reality is not just about what exists outside of you. It is also about what your mind constructs within you. The figure stands, as it always does, still, silent, watching. But now, you are no longer focused only on it. You're focused on the act of seeing it, on how it comes into being, on how your mind turns something invisible into something visible. The moment feels different now. Not less intense, but more understood. And in that understanding, the fear softens even further, because you begin to realize that the experience, while powerful, is also part of something natural, something human. The mind is doing what it has always done. It is taking something unknown and turning it into a story. That realization does not remove the mystery, but it changes your relationship with it. You are no longer just inside the story. You are aware of it being told. And then, as before, the moment ends. The weight lifts. Your body responds. Movement returns. You sit up slowly, your breathing steady, your thoughts calm. The room is empty, exactly as it always is. But now, something feels clearer. Not the entire experience, not every detail, but the role your mind plays in it. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. The same time. The same pattern. But now, it feels like part of something you are beginning to understand. You lie back down, your thoughts quieter than before. Not searching. Not questioning with urgency. Just reflecting. Because now, the mystery feels less like something outside of you, and more like something within you. And that changes everything. Because if the mind can create something this vivid, this consistent, this real, then the question is no longer just about what you saw. It becomes something deeper. What else is your mind capable of creating, without you even realizing it? That thought settles gently into the silence of the room. And as the night continues, calm and still, one quiet understanding remains. You are not just experiencing this story. You are part of the way it is being written. Chapter 6. Voices in the Quiet. By now, the nights have changed the way you move through your days. Not in an obvious way, no one around you would notice anything different, but internally, something has shifted. There is a quiet attentiveness in you now, a sense that something important is unfolding just beneath the surface of ordinary life. The experiences no longer feel isolated. They feel connected, part of something that continues even when you are fully awake. And with that feeling comes a natural pull to understand more, not just from within yourself, but from outside as well. At first, it happens almost casually. A small moment of curiosity. You find yourself wondering if anyone else has experienced something similar. Not in a dramatic way, not with urgency, just a quiet thought that appears and stays. Have others felt this too? The question feels simple, but it carries weight. Because if the answer is yes, then whatever is happening is not entirely personal. It is part of something shared. Later, in a quiet moment, you begin to look, not with expectation, not assuming anything, just gently exploring. And slowly, something begins to reveal itself. Stories, not identical, not exactly the same, but close enough to feel familiar. You read one account, then another, each one describing a moment in the night, waking up suddenly, unable to move, feeling a presence, seeing something in the room. The details vary slightly from person to person, but the structure remains consistent. The sequence is the same. The sensations are the same. Even the language people use begins to echo in a way that feels almost unsettling. It is not one isolated experience. It is many, from different places, different people, different lives, and yet they all describe something remarkably similar. That realization settles into your mind slowly, bringing with it a new layer of understanding. This is not just your story. It is a pattern shared by others. You continue reading, not out of obsession, but out of quiet curiosity. You notice the way people describe the moment, the stillness, the awareness, the inability to move, the presence that arrives before anything is seen, and then often the same kind of figure. Not always identical in detail, but similar enough to feel connected. You begin to notice something else as well, the emotions behind the stories. At first, fear, confusion, uncertainty, the same shift you felt. Curiosity, a desire to understand, a sense that something is happening beyond simple explanation. And then, something even more interesting begins to emerge. The repetition. Many of these experiences do not happen just once. They return. Sometimes days later, sometimes weeks, but often in the same way. The same sequence, the same feeling, the same time in the night. That detail stands out to you because it mirrors your own experience. The pattern is not only shared, it is structured. You sit with that realization for a moment, letting it settle, because it raises a question that feels both simple and complex at the same time. If so many people are experiencing something similar, what does that mean? You consider different possibilities. Maybe it is something purely biological, a natural function of the brain that occurs under certain conditions, something that happens to many people but is interpreted differently depending on how they understand it. Or maybe it is something shaped by culture, A shared set of images and ideas that people draw from without even realizing it. A kind of collective influence that guides how the experience is formed. That idea feels important, because as you read more, you begin to notice how similar the descriptions are, not just in structure, but in detail. The present, the stillness, the figure. It makes you wonder whether people are describing the same experience, or the same interpretation. The difference is subtle, but it matters, because the experience itself may begin in the same way for everyone. The paralysis, the awareness, the presence. But what comes after that may depend on what the mind already knows, what it has seen before, what it recognizes. That thought connects back to something you have already begun to understand. The mind does not create from nothing. It builds from memory, from images, from ideas. So when people experience something they cannot explain, their minds may reach for similar images to make sense of it. And if those images are shared across culture, then the stories will begin to sound the same. That realization does not make the experiences less meaningful. If anything, it makes them more fascinating, because it suggests that something deeply human is happening, something rooted in the way the mind works. The way it interprets, the way it tells stories. You pause for a moment, letting your thoughts settle. There is something strangely comforting about knowing others have experienced something similar, not because it explains everything, but because it removes the sense of isolation. You are not alone in this. Not in the experience, not in the questions. And that matters. As the evening returns once again, the room feels the same as it has before, but your awareness of it is now layered with everything you have learned. You no longer see it as just a physical space. You see it as part of a larger pattern. A place where something repeats, something that others have also described, in their own rooms, in their own lives. When you lie down, your body relaxes naturally, but your mind remains gently attentive, not tense, not expecting something specific, just open. Sleep comes, as it always does, slowly and quietly. And then, once again, you wake. The moment feels familiar now in a way that is almost calm. Your body is still. Your mind is clear. There is no confusion, no surprise, only awareness. And then, the feeling arrives. The presence, but this time it feels slightly different. Not because it has changed, but because you recognize it immediately, not just as something happening to you, but as something you have seen described before. That connection changes how you experience it. You are not just inside the moment. You are aware of its place within a larger pattern. Your eyes shift toward the darker part of the room, and just as before, the shape begins to form. Slowly, quietly, the same outline, the same stillness, the same silent observation. But now, as you look at it, something else is present in your mind. The memory of other voices, other people describing the same thing, and that creates a strange, quiet realization. This moment is both personal and shared. You observe the figure, but you also observe your own understanding of it. You see how your mind recognizes it more quickly now, how it fills in the details with greater ease, how the image feels almost familiar, not because it has changed, but because you have seen it before, both in your own experience and in the experiences of others. That awareness adds another layer to the moment, because now you begin to see how the experience is shaped not only by your own mind, but by the world around you, the stories, the images, the shared understanding. All of it plays a role. And yet, the feeling itself remains deeply personal. The stillness, the presence, the quiet awareness of something being there. That part cannot be shared fully. It can only be experienced. And then, as always, the moment begins to release. The weight lifts. Your body responds. Movement returns. You sit up slowly. Your breathing steady. Your thoughts calm. The room is empty, exactly as it always is. But now, something feels different again. Not the experience, but your connection to it. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. The same time The same pattern. But now, it feels like part of something larger than yourself. You lie back down, your thoughts moving gently through everything you have seen, everything you have read, everything you have experienced. There is no urgency to find answers, no pressure to solve the mystery. Only a quiet understanding that you are not alone in it, and that realization brings a kind of calm, because whatever this is, it is not just yours. It is something shared across many minds, many lives, many nights. And as that thought settles softly into the quiet of the room, one question remains, lingering gently in the background. Are these shared experiences or shared stories? The answer does not come, but the question stays. And sometimes, that is enough to keep the mind listening a little longer in the dark. Chapter 7. The moment it spread. There is a point in every mystery where it stops being only personal and begins to feel historical, as if what you are experiencing now has roots that stretch quietly into the past. By this stage, the nights have already shown you patterns, repetition, and something that feels deeply connected to the way the mind works. But now, another layer begins to reveal itself, one that has less to do with your own experience and more to do with how this experience came to be so familiar in the first place. During the day, your thoughts drift again, but this time they move outward. Instead of only replaying your own nights or reading scattered accounts, you begin to wonder when this specific image became so common. Not just the feeling of a presence, not just the stillness or the paralysis, but the figure itself, the smooth head, the large, dark eyes, the silent observation. It feels so recognizable that it almost seems universal, and yet you begin to realize that it must have started somewhere. That thought leads you further back, into stories that existed before your own experience. You begin to notice that older accounts of nighttime paralysis did not always describe the same figure. In some places, people spoke of shadows sitting on their chest. In others, it was described as a spirit pressing down on the body, or a presence without a clear shape. The feeling was there, the experience was there, but the image was different. That difference matters, because it suggests that the feeling comes first, and the image follows. And if the image follows, then something must have shaped it. You begin to trace that idea forward, moving through time in a quiet, thoughtful way. At some point the image changed. It became more defined, more specific, more consistent across different people and places. The question is, when that shift happened, and why? Eventually, your attention settles on a moment that seems to stand out more than the others. A point in time when the image of the figure became clearer, more widely recognized, and more deeply embedded in people's minds. It is connected to a name that appears again and again when you look into it. Whitley Strieber. At first, it is just a name, something you have perhaps heard before without thinking much about it. But as you look closer, the connection becomes clearer. In 1987, he wrote a book called Communion. On the surface, it was presented as an account of unusual experiences, something related to encounters that could not be easily explained. But what made it different was not just the story itself. It was how the story was told. Unlike earlier accounts that described clear, physical events happening in the waking world, this one carried a different tone. It was less certain, more introspective. The experiences were described in a way that felt dreamlike, almost as if they existed somewhere between waking and sleeping, between reality and perception. That distinction changes everything, because it brings the experience closer to what you have been going through. Not something that happens out there, in the sky or in some distant place, but something that unfolds within the mind, within the private space of a bedroom at night. But even more than the story, there was something else that left a lasting impression. Image. The cover of the book showed a face that was unlike anything most people had seen before, and yet it quickly became familiar. Smooth, pale, expressionless, with large, dark eyes that seemed to look directly at whoever was holding it. It was not loud or dramatic. It did not need to be. It was simple. And because it was simple, it stayed. You begin to understand how powerful that kind of image can be. It does not require belief. It does not ask for acceptance. It simply exists, quietly entering the mind and remaining there, waiting. Over time, that image spread. Through books, through television, through conversations. Even people who had never read the book began to recognize the face. It became part of the cultural background, something that existed just beneath awareness, ready to be recalled at any moment, and that is when something important begins to click into place. If the mind builds from memory, and memory includes images like this, then it is not surprising that so many people begin to see the same figure during moments of uncertainty. The feeling comes first. The mind responds, and it reaches for the most familiar shape it knows. You sit with that realization for a while, letting it settle slowly. It does not remove the mystery, but it adds depth to it. It shows how something deeply personal can also be influenced by something shared, something that exists outside of any single individual. The experience becomes a meeting point between inner sensation and outer influence. And that idea feels important, because it explains why the stories you read sound so similar, why the details repeat, why the same figure appears again and again, across different people, different places, different lives. It is not necessarily that everyone is seeing the same thing. It is that everyone is drawing from the same source. That thought stays with you as evening begins to return once more. The room feels familiar now in a deeper way, not just as a physical space, but as part of a pattern that extends beyond you. When you lie down, your body relaxes as it always does, but your mind carries this new understanding with it, not as a conclusion, not as something final, but as another layer in the growing picture. Sleep comes quietly, naturally, without resistance. And then, once again, you wake. The moment is familiar now, almost expected. Your body is still. Your mind is clear. There is no confusion, no hesitation, only awareness. And then, the presence arrives. But this time, something feels slightly different. Not in the presence itself, not in the figure, but in how you perceive it. Your eyes move toward the darker part of the room, and as the shape begins to form, you notice how quickly your mind recognizes it. There is no delay, no uncertainty. The image comes into focus with ease, as if it has already been fully defined before the moment even began. The smooth head, the large, dark eyes, the stillness. It is all there, exactly as before. But now, you understand something you did not fully grasp before. This image did not come from nowhere. It has been with you, quietly, long before this moment, stored somewhere in memory, waiting. That realization does not make the figure disappear. It does not weaken the experience. If anything, it makes it more complex, because now you are aware of the connection between what you see and what you have seen before, between the present moment and the past, between the mind and the world around it. You observe the figure, but you also observe your own recognition of it. The way your mind completes the image, fills in the details, holds it steady in your perception. It feels less like something appearing, and more like something being recalled. That thought stays with you as the moment continues. The presence remains still, silent, unchanged, and yet everything feels slightly different. Because now, you're not just inside the experience. You are aware of how it has been shaped, how it has been influenced, how it has been formed over time. And then, as always, the moment begins to fade. The weight lifts, your body responds. Movement returns. You sit up slowly, your breathing steady, your thoughts calm. The room is empty, exactly as it has been every time. But now, the understanding remains. You look at the clock, 3:33 a.m., the same time, the same pattern, but now it feels connected to something larger. Not just your own experience, but a shared history of how the mind sees, remembers, and creates. You lie back down, your thoughts moving gently through everything you have realized. There is no urgency to reach a final answer, no need to decide exactly what this is, because the mystery has not disappeared. It has simply become deeper, more layered, more connected, and somewhere within that depth, one quiet realization continues to grow. What you are experiencing is not just a moment in the night. It is part of a story that has been shaped over time. A story that lives not only in your mind, but in many others as well. Chapter 8. The bedroom as a threshold. By now, something subtle has begun to change in how you think about the room itself. It is no longer just a place where you sleep, or a space where the experience happens. It feels more like a boundary, a thin, almost invisible threshold where two states of awareness overlap. and where the usual rules of perception seem slightly different. During the day, this idea stays with you in the background. You notice how ordinary everything feels when you are fully awake. The stability of movement, the predictability of time, the certainty of your own body responding when you want it to. It all feels so solid, so reliable, that it becomes almost difficult to reconcile with what happens at night. Because at night, that reliability seems to loosen. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough to feel noticeable. You begin to see your room differently, not as something separate from the experience, but as part of it. The bed is no longer just a place of rest. The darkness is no longer just absence of light. The silence is no longer just quiet. Each element feels like it plays a role in something you are still trying to understand, and slowly, a new idea begins to form. Maybe the room is not just a setting. Maybe it is a trigger. A space where the mind naturally shifts into a different mode of awareness. That thought doesn't arrive as certainty. It arrives as curiosity, and curiosity, in this case, becomes more powerful than fear. You start paying closer attention to small details in the evening. The way the light fades, the way the corners of the room become less defined, the way familiar objects slowly lose their sharpness as darkness increases. Nothing about the room changes, but your perception of it does. It becomes less defined, more suggestive, more open to interpretation, and that openness feels important, because it mirrors something you have already begun to understand about your mind. It does not passively record reality, it interprets it. An interpretation always leaves space for variation. When you lie down that night, you do so with a slightly different awareness. Not expectation, not fear, but attention. A quiet sense that you are observing something that is part of a larger process. Sleep comes, as it always does. Gradual, unforced, natural. And then, once again, you wake. But 'tis time. Something feels even more familiar than before. There is no confusion in the moment of awareness, no struggle to understand what is happening. Your mind recognizes the state immediately, the stillness, the silence, the inability to move. But instead of reacting, you remain present within it. There is a shift in how you experience your own awareness. It feels sharper, more focused, as if your attention has narrowed to a single point. Your breathing is steady. Your thoughts are clear. And for a moment, there is only observation. Then, as before, the presence arrives. But now, it feels less like an intrusion and more like a continuation of something already in motion, as if it has been part of the experience from the beginning, rather than something added to it. Your eyes move toward the familiar area of the room, and the shape begins to appear, slowly, quietly. The same outline forming from the darkness. But this time your attention is not fixed only on what is appearing. It is also on where you are, the room itself. You notice how the environment seems unchanged, yet feels different. The darkness is the same, but your perception of it has shifted. It is no longer just empty space. It feels structured, almost intentional, as if it is part of the experience rather than separate from it. That realization brings a new kind of clarity. Because if the room is part of the experience, then everything within it becomes relevant. The bed, the walls, the still air, even the silence. All of it forms the background against which your mind constructs the experience. And that construction feels increasingly important. You begin to notice how the figure emerges in relation to your awareness of the space. It does not appear randomly. It forms within a context, within a setting that your mind already recognizes as familiar. Your bedroom, a place associated with rest, safety, and routine. That contrast feels significant, because the experience is anything but routine, and yet it unfolds in the most routine place in your life. That contradiction holds your attention. The figure remains still, as always, silent, observing. But your focus is no longer entirely on it. It is divided now. Part of your awareness is on the presence, and part is on the environment that allows the presence to feel real. And then another thought begins to surface. If this experience happens in a space that is so familiar, so deeply embedded in your daily life, then perhaps the mind uses that familiarity as part of the structure itself. It does not create experiences in abstract space. It builds them in meaningful space. Spaces that already carry emotional weight. Spaces that already feel personal. That idea settles quietly, adding another layer to what you are beginning to understand. The experience is not happening in isolation. It is happening in context, and context shapes perception. The presence remains unchanged. The figure still stands, but your awareness of how it is being formed becomes clearer, not as something external entering your room, but as something emerging within the framework your mind is already using to interpret the space around you. Then, as before, the moment begins to shift. The weight in your body lifts. Movement returns gradually. You sit up slowly, your breathing steady, your thoughts calm. The room is empty, exactly as it always is. But now, the room feels slightly different again. Not physically, but conceptually. It no longer feels like just a place where something happens. It feels like part of the mechanism that allows the experience to occur. You look at the clock, 3:33 a.m. The same time, the same pattern. But now, it feels less like a coincidence and more like a marker. A point where awareness consistently crosses into another state. You lie back down, your thoughts no longer trying to force conclusions. Instead, they rest in observation, because you are beginning to see a pattern that extends beyond the figure itself, beyond the experience, even beyond the nights. It includes the space, the mind, and the way both interact when awareness shifts. And in that understanding, something new quietly forms. A sense that the bedroom is not just where the experience happens. It is where the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes thin enough for the mind to step across it without noticing. And once that boundary is noticed, it can never feel exactly the same again. Chapter 9. The Language of the Mind at Night. By this stage, something has changed in the way you interpret silence itself. It is no longer just the absence of sound. It feels more like a medium, something your mind moves through differently when everything else goes still. You begin to notice how the night has its own structure, even if that structure cannot be measured or easily described. During the day, life feels continuous, stable, and predictable. Thoughts follow one another in a linear way. Actions respond to intention without delay. Everything feels anchored in physical certainty. But at night, especially in those moments between sleep and awareness, that certainty seems to loosen just enough for something else to emerge. Not chaos, not randomness, but something softer, something interpretive. You start to realize that your mind does not simply switch off when you sleep. It shifts into another mode of processing, one that does not rely on logic or linear thinking in the same way. Instead, it builds meaning from fragments. Sensation becomes story. Emotion becomes structure. Memory becomes imagery. And in that space, perception becomes flexible. That flexibility is where everything you have experienced begins to make more sense. Because what you have been calling a presence is not just a visual event. It is a combination of sensation, awareness, expectation, and interpretation, all happening at once in a state where the boundaries between them are not clearly separated. You begin to notice this pattern more clearly now. It starts before anything is seen, before any shape forms, before any image appears. There is a moment of awareness, a shift in attention, a feeling that something has entered the space, even though nothing has physically changed. That feeling is consistent. It arrives. First, and only after it arrives does the mind begin to construct what it might mean. This realization begins to feel important, because it suggests that the experience is not built from sight alone. It is built from expectation. An expectation is something your mind generates continuously, even without your awareness. You think about how often in daily life your brain fills in missing information without you noticing. When you hear a sound in another room, your mind immediately assigns meaning to it. When you see a shadow, your brain instantly interprets shape and depth. You rarely experience raw sensory input without interpretation. At night, when external input is reduced, that interpretive system does not stop. It becomes more sensitive, more active, more influential. and so the mind begins to fill the silence. Not randomly, but meaningfully. You start to see how this connects to your experience. The stillness of your body is not just stillness. It becomes a signal. The inability to move is not just a physical state. It becomes part of the interpretation. The darkness is not just absence of light. It becomes a canvas for a projection. And within that combination, the mind constructs something that feels complete. A presence, a figure, a watcher. Not because it exists independently in the room, but because your mind is trying to make sense of a state that feels unusual, unfamiliar, and emotionally charged. That does not reduce the intensity of the experience. If anything, it explains why it feels so structured, so consistent, so recognizable. Because your mind is not improvising in chaos. It is drawing from a limited set of internal tools: memory, imagery, emotion, cultural patterns to build something that feels coherent in a moment, where coherence is disrupted, and that coherence becomes the experience itself. You lie awake one evening, thinking about this in a quiet, reflective way. Not trying to disprove anything, not trying to finalize an explanation. Just observing how layered the process might be. And in that reflection, something else becomes noticeable. The way language itself begins to form around the experience. You realize that when people describe these moments, they often use very similar phrases. I couldn't move. I felt a presence. It was standing there. I knew I wasn't alone. The consistency is striking, not just in what is described, but in how it is described. Almost as if there is a shared vocabulary for something deeply personal. That raises another thought. Maybe the experience is not only shaped by the mind, maybe it is also shaped by how the mind is taught to describe unusual states. Once a pattern of language exists, it becomes easier for others to adopt it, even unconsciously. And once that language becomes widespread, it begins to influence how new experiences are remembered and expressed. You begin to see how perception and expression feed into each other. What is felt becomes language, and language, in turn, shapes how future feelings are understood. That loop is subtle, but powerful, and it may explain why the accounts you have read feel so aligned, even across different people and backgrounds. It is not necessarily because the experience is identical, but because the framework used to describe it has become shared. As the night approaches again, you notice your awareness of the room has changed once more. It feels less like a physical environment and more like a familiar mental landscape. You recognize its patterns now. The way darkness settles, the way silence deepens, the way your attention begins to shift inward. When you lie down, there is no expectation of something specific happening, only awareness of the process you now understand more deeply than before. Sleep arrives quietly, as always, and then you wake. The state is familiar. Your body is still. Your mind is aware, but your interpretation of it has changed. You are no longer trying to identify what is happening in the moment. You are noticing how the moment is constructed. There is a difference between those two states of attention. One is reactive. The other is observational, and you are beginning to exist more in the second. The presence arrives, as it always does. But now, instead of focusing only on its form, your awareness includes the process of recognition itself. You notice how quickly your mind assembles meaning, how effortlessly it moves from sensation to interpretation, how naturally it fills in the gaps. The figure is still there, still silent, still unchanged, but your understanding of it is no longer fixed. It feels less like an external entity and more like a stable interpretation your mind returns to under certain conditions. That realization does not erase the experience. It reframes it, and in that reframing, something subtle happens. The fear that once defined the moment is no longer present in the same way. It has been replaced by attention. Careful, steady, reflective. The moment continues, as it always does, until it begins to fade. The weight lifts. Movement returns. You sit up slowly, breathing steady, the room unchanged. Empty. Silent. Familiar. You glance at the clock. 3:33 a.m. The repetition is still there, but now it feels less like a signal and more like a rhythm. a recurring point where awareness shifts from one state to another. You lie back down, not searching for answers, but observing the structure of what you are experiencing more closely than before. And somewhere in that quiet understanding, a new thought begins to form. If the mind can build such consistent experiences from fragments, memory, and expectation, then the boundary between what is experienced and what is constructed may not be as fixed as it first appears. And that idea, once noticed, does not easily disappear. Chapter 10. When memory begins to dream back, something subtle begins to happen as the nights continue. The experience no longer feels like it belongs only to the present moment. It starts to reach backward, as if it is touching parts of your memory that were never directly connected to it before. Not in a clear, deliberate way, but in a quiet unfolding that becomes noticeable only when you pause long enough to reflect. During the day, you begin to notice small shifts in your attention. Ordinary things take on a slightly different tone. A sound in a quiet room feels more significant than before. A shadow in a corner holds your attention a little longer. Not because anything has changed externally, but because your awareness of perception itself has changed. You are no longer only experiencing events. You are noticing how they are formed, and that change begins to reach into memory. You start to think about earlier moments in your life, moments that once felt unrelated, and you begin to wonder if they might share a subtle connection with what you are experiencing now. Not in content, but in structure. The feeling of waking suddenly, the sensation of being aware before your body fully responds, the brief confusion between sleep and waking. These memories do not feel new, but they feel newly relevant, and that relevance changes how you hold them. It becomes harder to separate what is this experience from what might have been part of a longer pattern you simply never paid attention to before. That thought is not dramatic. It does not arrive as a revelation. It arrives as a soft recognition, like noticing a familiar sound in a distant place. And once it appears, it does not leave easily. You begin to realize something important about memory itself. It is not fixed. It is not static. It is responsive. It changes depending on what you are currently experiencing. The present reshapes the past, not by altering facts, but by changing emphasis. Certain memories become more vivid, others fade into the background. Some take on new meaning they never had before. This realization begins to influence how you interpret everything else. Because if memory can shift in meaning, then the experience you are having now may also be part of that shifting process. Not just something happening in isolation, but something that interacts with your internal archive of past sensations, emotions, and impressions. You start to notice how often people who describe similar experiences refer back to moments in their past that suddenly feel connected. Childhood memories of waking in fear, brief sensations of presence, dreams that felt unusually real. At the time, these moments were scattered, unimportant, easily forgotten. But now, through the lens of what is happening, they begin to align. Not perfectly, but enough to feel meaningful. And that raises a deeper question. Are these experiences revealing something hidden in memory? Or are they giving new structure to things that were always unstructured before? The distinction is subtle, but important, because it determines whether the experience is uncovering something or constructing it. As evening approaches, you notice that your awareness of sleep itself is beginning to change. It no longer feels like a simple transition from wakefulness to rest. It feels like a passage into another form of awareness, one that you are becoming increasingly familiar with, even if you still do not fully understand it. You lie down with less resistance now, not because the mystery has disappeared, but because your relationship to it has shifted. There is less urgency, less fear, more observation. Sleep arrives in its usual quiet way, and then you wake. The moment is familiar now in its structure, even if it still carries intensity in its experience. Your body is still, your mind is aware. There is no confusion about the state you are in, but something else is happening now. Your attention is not only on the present moment, it is also on recognition. You are noticing how quickly your mind identifies the situation, how instantly it categorizes the experience. The stillness is no longer just stillness. It is immediately understood as part of a pattern you have already encountered multiple times. That recognition itself becomes part of the experience. And then, as always, the presence arrives. But this time your awareness moves differently. You are no longer only observing what appears. You are observing how it is recognized. The figure forms, as it always does. Slowly, consistently, predictably. The same outline, the same stillness, the same sense of silent observation. But now, something else is present alongside it. Your awareness of memory. Not just recent memory of previous nights, but deeper memory. The sense that this image feels familiar in a way that extends beyond the current sequence of experiences. Not because it is identical to anything specific you recall, but because it fits into a broader category your mind has already learned to interpret. Your mind is doing something quietly powerful in this moment. It is matching, not just to one memory, but two patterns of memory. And that matching process gives the experience its shape. You begin to see how flexible perception really is, how easily it moves between present sensation and stored imagery, how quickly it assembles meaning when faced with something ambiguous. The figure remains unchanged, but your understanding of how it is being formed continues to evolve. It feels less like something entering your space, and more like something emerging from the interaction between present awareness and accumulated memory. The moment holds steady for a while longer, as it always does. Then, gradually, it begins to release. The stillness in your body fades. Movement returns. You sit up slowly, breathing steady. The room exactly as it has always been. Empty, quiet, unchanged. But your internal sense of it is not the same as before. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. The repetition remains, but now it feels less like an external pattern and more like an internal rhythm, a recurring alignment between states of awareness. You lie back down, your thoughts no longer chasing conclusions. Instead, they rest in observation, because something important has become clear in a quiet, gradual way. What you're experiencing is not separate from your memory. It is interacting with it. And in that interaction, meaning is being shaped, not fully controlled, not fully random, but formed in a space between the two. And that realization begins to settle deeper than the others, because it suggests something fundamental. That memory is not just something you carry into the present. It is something that participates in how the present is experienced. And once that idea takes hold, the boundary between what is happening now and what has already been lived begins to feel less defined, not broken, not erased, but softened. And in that softness, the mind continues its quiet work, turning fragments into form, sensation into structure, and awareness into something that feels like meaning. Chapter 11. The thin place between sleep and awareness. There comes a point in this unfolding experience where the most important discovery is no longer about what is seen, or even what is felt, but about the transition itself. The moment where one state of awareness dissolves into another. That thin, almost unnoticeable passage where sleep does not fully arrive, yet wakefulness is no longer complete. You begin to notice this transition more carefully now, not because you are trying to control it, but because you are beginning to recognize it. During the day, this awareness stays in the background like a quiet echo. You move through normal routines, conversations, tasks, and responsibilities, but something in you remains lightly tuned to the idea that the mind is more than one mode of being. Not metaphorically, but functionally. Different states of awareness that feel entirely real while they are happening, yet completely distinct once they pass. And that realization slowly shifts your understanding of sleep itself. Sleep is no longer just rest. It feels more like entry. A shift into a different kind of perception, one that does not follow the usual rules of continuity. You begin to remember moments when you were falling asleep but still aware enough to notice fragments of thought drifting in and out. Images forming without intention, sensations without clear origin, thoughts that feel like they are coming from somewhere slightly outside your control, yet still inside your mind. These moments, once ignored or forgotten, now feel significant because they seem connected to what happens later, to the episodes that feel more structured, more vivid, more coherent than typical dreams. You begin to wonder if there is a threshold where the mind is neither fully awake nor fully asleep, but something in between. A space where perception is unstable, where interpretation is not yet fixed, and where the brain is still deciding how to construct experience. That idea becomes increasingly important, because it suggests that what you are encountering is not a sudden event, but the outcome of a gradual transition that you rarely notice in daily life. As night approaches again, you become more aware of this transition as it begins. The room darkens slowly, as it always does. Familiar objects lose definition. Edges soften. The environment begins to feel less like something you are actively observing and more like something you are gradually dissolving into. You lie down, not with expectation, but with attention. There is no attempt to control what will happen, only awareness of the process itself. Sleep arrives in its usual way, quiet and unforced. And then, as before, you wake. But this time the moment feels different in a subtle but important way. It is not just the awareness of being awake while still unable to move. It is the awareness of how quickly that state is recognized. There is almost no gap between experience and interpretation. Your mind identifies the situation immediately, not as something new, but as something already understood. That recognition itself becomes part of the experience. The stillness is there. The silence is there. The absence of movement is there. But layered on top of it is something new, a sense of familiarity that extends beyond repetition. It feels as if your mind has learned the pattern so well that it no longer needs to search for meaning in the moment. It already has one prepared. And then, as always, the presence arrives. But this time your attention is divided in a more complex way. You are aware of the figure, but you are also aware of how your mind arrives at the figure. There is a shift happening in your perception, where observation and interpretation begin to separate slightly. Not completely, but enough for you to notice both simultaneously. The figure forms again in the darkness. Same structure, same stillness, same silent watchfulness. But now, instead of focusing only on its appearance, your awareness extends to the process of its appearance. You begin to notice how your attention moves, how it narrows, how it constructs a boundary between what is perceived and what is assumed, and in that space between perception and assumption, something subtle becomes visible. The mind is not just reacting, it is organizing. It is taking fragmented sensory input, incomplete awareness, and internal expectation, and assembling them into something coherent enough to feel real. And this assembly happens quickly. Almost instantly, so quickly that it feels like a single event rather than a process. But now, you can see that it is a process, and that changes everything about how it feels. Because once you see that construction happening, the experience becomes layered. One layer is the immediate sensation of presence. The other is the awareness that this presence is being formed through interpretation. Both layers exist at the same time, and neither cancels the other. The figure remains unchanged, still, silent, but your awareness of it is no longer singular. It is split between what is experienced and how it is experienced. That split creates a kind of clarity that did not exist before. Not clarity in the sense of explanation, but clarity in the sense of structure. You are beginning to see the architecture behind perception itself, and then something else becomes noticeable. The emotional tone of the experience has shifted again. The fear is no longer dominant. It is present, but distant. What has replaced it is something more neutral. Observation. A steady awareness of what is happening without immediate emotional escalation. That shift does not make the experience less significant. It makes it more complex, because now you are able to remain within it while also analyzing it from within. A dual awareness. Participant and observer at the same time. The moment continues for a while longer in this state. Then, as before, it begins to dissolve. The weight lifts. Movement returns. You sit up slowly, breathing steady. The room unchanged, empty, silent, familiar. You glance at the clock. 3:33 a.m. Still consistent, still repeating, but now it feels less like a marker of something external, and more like a boundary point within your own cycle of awareness, a point where perception transitions. You lie back down, no longer searching for answers, but resting in observation, because something fundamental has become clearer now. The experience does not begin when the figure appears. It begins earlier, in the transition between states, in the thin, unstable space, where awareness has not yet decided how to interpret itself. And once that space is noticed, it cannot be unseen again. Chapter 12. When the pattern becomes clear. By now, the experience no longer feels like something that surprises you. It feels like something that unfolds in a recognizable sequence, almost like a process you are gradually learning the shape of. Not because it has become less intense, but because your awareness of it has become more structured. During the day, you notice a new kind of reflection forming in your thoughts. It is not about the figure anymore. It is not even about the sensation of presence in the room. It is about the consistency of everything surrounding it, the timing, the sequence, the way your awareness shifts at the same point each night, the way your mind reacts in predictable stages. This recognition begins to change how you interpret the experience itself. You start seeing it less as an isolated event and more as a pattern. And patterns invite analysis, not in a forced way, but naturally. As if your mind is trying to map something that repeats itself enough times to be understood, you begin to think about how the experience starts. Not when you wake up during it, but before that. There's a transition into sleep that now feels more important than anything else. You notice how awareness fades gradually, how thoughts become less structured, how perception loosens its grip on the physical environment. It is not a sudden shift. It is a slow descent into a different kind of mental state. And within that descent, something begins to form. Not clearly, not intentionally, but subtly, a kind of internal readiness that you did not notice before. It feels like your mind is entering a mode where interpretation becomes more fluid, where meaning is less fixed, and where internal imagery can take shape without interruption. That realization changes how you see everything that follows, because if the experience begins before waking, then what you encounter later is not the starting point. It is the result. You begin to notice how often your attention now focuses on the process rather than the content. Instead of asking what the figure is, or whether it is real, your mind begins to ask how it is constructed within the experience. That question does not feel theoretical anymore. It feels observational, as if you are watching a system repeat itself and slowly understanding its behavior. As night approaches again, the familiarity of the room takes on a different tone. It is no longer just a place where the experience happens. It feels like part of the mechanism that allows the transition to occur. The lighting, the silence, the stillness of the environment all contribute to the sense that your awareness is slowly being guided into a specific state. You lie down with a calm that is different from before. Not resignation, not expectation, but awareness. Sleep comes gradually, as it always does. And then you wake. The moment is instantly recognizable. Your body is still. Your mind is awake. There is no confusion, no shock, no attempt to understand what is happening. Instead, there is recognition, and that recognition itself feels like part of the pattern. You notice how quickly your mind categorizes the state, how efficiently it labels the experience without needing to think through it. It is as if your mind has learned the structure so well that it no longer needs to interpret it from scratch. And then, as always, the presence arrives. But this time something feels even more integrated. The figure appears as it always does. Same shape, same stillness, same quiet observation, but your awareness of it is no longer isolated. It is part of a wider understanding of how the experience unfolds. You are not just seeing it, you are seeing the process that produces it. There is a shift in how attention operates in this moment. Instead of locking fully onto the figure, your awareness expands slightly, allowing you to observe both the image and the conditions under which the image appears. The stillness of your body, the clarity of your awareness, the transition state between sleep and wakefulness. All of it becomes part of a single structure. And within that structure, the figure feels less like an independent entity and more like a form that arises within a specific configuration of mind and perception. This does not diminish its presence. It reframes it, because now you begin to see that what you experience is not separate from your mental state. It is shaped by it. And that shaping happens in real time. The figure remains unchanged, but your understanding of its origin continues to deepen. It feels less like something entering the room, and more like something emerging from the conditions of awareness itself. A construction, not in the sense of imagination alone, but in the sense of perception assembling meaning from internal and external signals that are not yet fully differentiated. The experience holds steady for a while longer. In this dual awareness, one part of your mind remains within the moment. Another part observes how the moment is being formed. And then, as before, the state begins to dissolve. The weight lifts. Movement returns. You sit up slowly. The room is exactly as it has always been. Empty. Silent. Unchanged. But your understanding of it feels different again. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. Still repeating. Still consistent. But now, instead of feeling like a marker of something happening to you, it feels like a boundary within your own perception. A point where one mode of awareness ends and another begins. You lie back down, no longer searching for meaning in the experience itself, but in the structure that produces it. And at this point, something becomes quietly undeniable. The experience is no longer just about what appears in the room. It is about how the mind transitions into a state where appearance becomes possible. And once that transition is understood as part of the pattern itself begins to feel less mysterious. Not fully explained, but clearly structured. And that structure becomes the most important discovery so far. Chapter 13. The quiet resolution. At some point, the need to search for answers begins to soften, not because everything has been solved, and not because the mystery has disappeared, but because your relationship with it has changed in a way that feels more stable, more grounded. The nights are still the same. The room is still the same. The pattern still unfolds, of the same quiet precision. But something inside you no longer reacts to it in the same way. During the day, you notice this shift more clearly. The experience no longer sits at the center of your thoughts. It is still there, but it has moved into a different place in your awareness. Not as an urgent question, but as a familiar structure your mind has learned to recognize. You begin to think less in terms of what is happening and more in terms of how it happens. And that subtle shift changes everything. Because now, the experience feels less like an external event that arrives in the night, and more like a transition your mind enters under certain conditions. A repeatable state, a predictable unfolding of perception when awareness moves through the boundary between wakefulness and sleep. That boundary no longer feels sharp, it feels thin, almost transparent. You start to understand that what you have been calling the experience is not one single moment, but a sequence of mental shifts. A gradual loosening of external awareness. A rise in internal imagery. A moment where perception becomes fluid enough for interpretation to take shape without resistance. And within that fluidity, the mind does what it has always done. It builds meaning. It constructs structure. It turns uncertainty into something recognizable. This understanding does not remove the depth of what you experienced. It does not make it feel less real. If anything, it reveals how deeply real it was within the state it occurred. Because in that state, perception itself becomes reality. And that realization brings a quiet kind of clarity. Not sharp, not dramatic, but steady. You begin to see how the mind operates, not as a passive receiver of experience, but as an active participant in shaping it. Every sensation filtered, every gap filled, every ambiguity resolved through internal patterns drawn from memory, culture, and expectation. The figure you once focused on begins to feel less like an isolated mystery and more like a familiar form your mind returns to when certain conditions align. Not chosen consciously, not imagined deliberately, but assembled naturally through the same processes that allow you to dream, remember, and interpret the world around you. And the more you understand this, the more the experience shifts in meaning. Not in content, but in interpretation. The nights still unfold, the transition still happens. The awareness still shifts, but your internal response is no longer centered around uncertainty. It is centered around recognition, as if you are beginning to understand the language your mind uses when it moves between states of awareness. And that language is not made of words, it is made of patterns, sensation, memory, expectation, recognition. One evening, as you prepare for sleep, you notice something subtle yet important. There is no anticipation in the way there once was. no waiting for something to happen, no silent questioning of what the night might bring. Instead, there is a calm familiarity, not because the mystery is gone, but because it is understood differently now. Sleep comes as it always does, gently and without force, and then, as before, you wake. The moment is immediate, but no longer disorienting. Your body is still, your awareness is clear, and there is a quiet acceptance of the state itself. You do not react to it. You recognize it, and that recognition carries a sense of continuity, as if you are moving through a known phase rather than entering something unknown. The presence arrives, the figure forms, the familiar structure unfolds. But now, your attention is no longer divided between fear and curiosity. It rests in observation. You see the process more clearly than before, the way awareness narrows, the way interpretation activates, the way the mind assembles form from internal signals that are not fully separated from perception in this state. The figure is still there, but it no longer stands alone in your awareness. It is part of a larger system you are beginning to understand, a system where perception, memory, and awareness interact fluidly during the transition between sleep and wakefulness. And in that understanding, something important settles. The experience does not need to be resolved to be understood. It only needs to be seen clearly. The moment continues, steady and unchanged, until it begins to dissolve, as it always does. The weight lifts. Movement returns. You sit up slowly. The room is empty, quiet, familiar. You look at the clock. 3:33 a.m. Still there. Still consistent. But now it no longer feels like a signal from something outside you. It feels like a rhythm within you, a repeated alignment between states of consciousness. You remain seated for a moment longer, not searching, not analyzing, simply aware. And in that awareness, something quiet and final begins to settle. The experience has not disappeared. It has not ended, but it has changed its place in your understanding. It is no longer something happening to you. It is something happening through the way your mind moves between states of being. And once that is understood, the mystery does not vanish. It simply becomes part of something larger. The way consciousness itself constructs reality in the space between waking and sleep. And in that space, the night no longer feels like a place of uncertainty. It feels like a mirror, reflecting not something external, but the quiet architecture of the mind itself. Beyond the quiet door. And so the nights continue, not as interruptions in your life, but as a parallel rhythm that runs alongside it. What once felt like isolated experiences now feels like variations of a single underlying process, one that reveals itself only when awareness slips into that narrow space between waking and sleep. You no longer wait for it in the way you once did. There is no anticipation, no fear, no attempt to predict what will happen next. Instead, there is a calm recognition that whatever unfolds is part of a pattern you have come to understand, not with certainty, but with familiarity. The figure, the presence, the stillness, all of it remains part of the experience, but no longer as a question demanding an answer. It exists now as part of a larger understanding of how perception behaves when it is no longer anchored fully in waking reality. And in that understanding, something important has shifted. The mystery is no longer outside you. It has become a reflection of how deeply the mind can shape experience when the boundaries between states begin to soften. During the day, life continues in its usual clarity. Conversations, movement, decisions, all grounded in the stability of waking awareness. But somewhere beneath that surface, there is now a quiet awareness that perception is more fluid than it appears, and that the mind is always working in layers, even when you are not paying attention. You begin to notice how easily meaning forms, how quickly the mind organizes fragments into structure, how effortlessly it turns sensation into story. Not as something unusual, but as something constant, something fundamental to being conscious at all. And that realization does not weaken your sense of reality, it deepens it. Because reality is no longer just what is outside you, it is also how it is being interpreted within you. The experience that once felt like an intrusion from somewhere unknown now feels like a demonstration of something far more intimate. The mind's ability to create coherence in moments where coherence is temporarily lost. not as illusion, but as construction. And yet, even with this understanding, there remains a quiet space that cannot be fully explained away. A space where sensation still feels immediate, where awareness still feels sharp, where the boundary between perception and interpretation is thin enough to notice, even if it cannot be fully defined. That space is not filled with answers. It is filled with awareness itself. And perhaps that is where the meaning of it all quietly rests. Not in proving what is real or unreal, not in deciding what is external or internal, but in recognizing the extraordinary way consciousness moves between them. As you look back on everything, there is no final conclusion that fully closes the experience. Instead, there is something softer, a kind of understanding that does not end the mystery, but places it gently within a larger frame. The nights are still the nights. The mind is still the mind. And the boundary between them is still delicate, still shifting, still alive in its own quiet way. But now, you are aware of it. And awareness changes everything it touches. So when the room grows still again, and the world outside fades into silence, and that familiar threshold begins to form once more, the question is no longer about what might be waiting in the dark. It becomes something simpler, something deeper. What is the mind becoming in the space where it forgets? Just for a moment, how to tell the difference between dreaming and waking. And in that question, the story does not end. It continues quietly, every night, in the hidden architecture of awareness itself.